Outside the church, the flashing lights of ambulances cut through what had moments earlier been a peaceful Sunday afternoon. Sirens echoed against nearby buildings as members of the congregation poured out onto the steps and sidewalks, many still in shock, some crying openly, others standing silently with hands clasped in prayer. Small circles formed almost instinctively. Strangers held hands like family, refusing to leave, unwilling to accept how quickly everything had changed. Just minutes earlier, Pastor Charles Jenkins had been standing tall behind the pulpit, preaching with conviction and warmth. Now he was being rushed to the hospital, listed in serious condition, and placed under close medical observation. Now, waiting in silence. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. The usual sounds of a medical floor, footsteps, hushed conversations, the steady beeping of monitors, felt louder in the silence created by worry. Doctors moved quickly, focused on stabilizing Pastor Jenkins and determining what had caused his sudden collapse. Tests were ordered, vitals were monitored, and every decision carried weight. There were no dramatic announcements, no immediate answers, only careful, methodical work. His family remained close. His wife, described by those nearby as heartbroken, yet remarkably composed, stayed by his side as much as possible. She asked for privacy, not out of distance, but out of protection, for her husband, for their family, and for a moment that was deeply personal. At the same time, she encouraged supporters to continue praying, knowing the strength of the community that surrounded them. When concern turned into conversation. As the hours passed, what began as a frightening moment inside one church quickly spread far beyond its walls. News traveled fast, carried by text messages, phone calls, and social media posts shared with shaking hands and heavy hearts. Platforms filled with messages of prayer, encouragement, and disbelief. Short video clips from inside the sanctuary circulated widely, capturing the sudden shift from worship to worry. One moment there had been singing and preaching. The next, confusion and fear. Hashtags calling for prayer began trending, and comments poured in from across the country, and even from people overseas who had never set foot in the church but felt connected through faith. Fellow pastors, gospel artists, and community leaders added their voices, urging unity rather than speculation. Their words carried empathy and familiarity, as many of them understood the emotional weight of seeing a spiritual leader suddenly fall. What stood out most was not the speed of the news, but the depth of the response. A community gathered in the dark. Outside the church, long after the building had emptied, candlelight vigils began to form. Members gathered quietly, some wrapped in coats against the night air, others sitting on the steps with heads bowed. Soft hymns floated through the darkness, interrupted by whispered prayers and the occasional sound of someone crying. These moments were not organized for cameras or attention. They were raw, tender, and deeply human. People came not because they knew what to do, but because they did not know how to leave. Families stood side by side, strangers embraced, and familiar faces who usually exchanged quick greetings on Sundays now lingered together for hours. The pastor who had guided them through joy, grief, and celebration was now fighting for his health, and the congregation felt unsteady without him. Yet even in their fear, there was a sense of togetherness that felt grounding. Love, not spectacle, held the night together. Questions born. From fear, not judgment, alongside the prayers and candlelight, questions began to surface quietly. They did not come from malice or gossip, but from worry and confusion. People wanted to understand what had happened. Was it exhaustion? Stress? A medical condition that had gone unnoticed? The lack of detailed information left room for uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally invites questions. Many found themselves replaying recent memories, moments when he looked tired, sermons delivered after long travel days, commitments stacked closely together. In hindsight, small signs felt heavier. The silence from official channels, though understandable in a medical crisis, only deepened the unease. People were not demanding answers. They were searching for reassurance that this moment made sense somehow. From one incident to a larger conversation. Gradually, The focus shifted. What initially felt like a single, shocking health emergency began to open into a much wider conversation. Pastor Jenkins's collapse became a point of reflection for faith communities everywhere. People started talking not only about what happened, but about why moments like this feel so surprising when they occur. There was a growing recognition that spiritual leaders are often expected to be endlessly available, emotionally strong, and unwavering at all times. They are called upon during crises, celebrations, late nights, and early mornings. Often without pause, the incident forced many to confront a difficult truth. Pastors are frequently seen as pillars, not people. When those pillars show signs of strain, it can feel unsettling, even threatening, to the sense of stability a congregation depends on. The hidden weight of leadership. Those close to Pastor Jenkins quietly acknowledged what many in the congregation had not fully seen. In the weeks leading up to his collapse, his schedule had been relentless. Travel, preaching engagements, music commitments, meetings, counseling sessions, and administrative responsibilities filled nearly every available moment. Rest often came last, if it came at all. Like many leaders driven by a deep sense of calling, he had pushed through fatigue, believing the work could not wait and the people could not be left unsupported. There is an unspoken pressure in leadership to always say yes, to always show up, and to never appear weak. For pastors, that pressure can feel even heavier, wrapped in spiritual language about sacrifice and service. Difficult but necessary. Questions. As the days unfolded, people began asking questions that did not have easy answers. How much responsibility is too much for one person to carry? At what point does devotion cross into self-neglect? And how can faith communities better support their leaders, not only through prayer and encouragement, but through practical care, shared responsibility, and permission to rest? These questions challenged long-held assumptions. They asked congregations to reconsider the idea that leadership must come at the expense of health. They also asked leaders to reflect on whether stepping back, asking for help, or setting boundaries might actually strengthen rather than weaken their ministry. A moment of collective reflection. As concern continued to ripple through the church and beyond, something else began to surface alongside fear, reflection. Members started looking inward, not just at their pastor, but at themselves. There was growing acknowledgement that leadership is not meant to be carried alone. The idea that one individual should bear the full emotional, spiritual, and logistical weight of a ministry began to feel unrealistic and unfair. Conversations emerged about shared leadership, healthier expectations, and the importance of rest, not as a lack of faith, but as an expression of wisdom. People began to see that caring for a pastor's well-being was not a distraction from spiritual life, but a vital part of it. Redefining strength and faith. For some, this moment reshaped how they understood strength. They began to see that faith does not require constant sacrifice without care. Strength is not only shown in endurance, but also in discernment, knowing when to pause, when to ask for help, and when to protect one's health. Pastor Jenkins' collapse did not diminish his calling or his impact. Instead, it humanized him. It reminded the congregation that leadership, at its core, is not about perfection or endless output, but about authenticity, care, and sustainability. In that sense, even in crisis, something meaningful emerged, a deeper understanding of what leadership truly costs and what it truly deserves in return. Holding on to hope. Inside the hospital, the fight for recovery continued quietly. Doctors monitored him closely, and every small sign of stability brought cautious hope. Outside, prayers continued to rise, from church pews, living rooms, hospital waiting areas, and online spaces. The gospel community remained united, bound together by concern for one man and what he represented to so many. While the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing became clear. This moment had already changed the conversation. Pastor Charles Jenkins's collapse was no longer just about a sudden medical emergency. It had become a powerful reminder of human limits, the unseen burdens of leadership, and the responsibility communities share in caring for those who serve them. In that sense, even in crisis, Something meaningful was taking shape, an opportunity for greater compassion, balance, and understanding within the life of the church.